Have you had an encounter with Mr. or Mrs. Tall, Dark, and Scary? Did you run screaming, or did you stand your ground? Or did you pour him some tea and spill the tea? I don't know, but I want you to tell me all about it because I know everyone else wants to hear it too. So get in there, send me an email. You can send it to contact@buckeyebigfoot.com. I can't wait to read it. Hello there, everyone. Now listen up. Tonight is a little bit different. This person is, well, they're telling us all about it for sure. I think you're going to like it. I know I did. So go grab your snackage. Get your booty on up in there in the saddle. We got some miles to turn. We're heading to Mount Rainier in Washington State. So, yeah, we got a long way to go for Sasquatch Valley tonight. Are you ready? Me too. Let's go. Many people think Park Service people and other government entities know about the existence of Sasquatch, and they work hard to hide it. I do believe that. I know it for a fact. I'm going to tell you about my experience many years ago when I was in my 20s. I was college educated, and I felt invincible, as most people do in their 20s. I had never encountered anything violent, nothing scary, nothing to make me worry or be afraid. I felt the whole world would be as lovely and kind as I was, as generous and friendly as the mid-sized Midwestern city that I grew up in. In time, I learned, well, that's not how it is, and I learned the hard way a few times. Now, prior to learning any of those hard lessons, I was a serious outdoor enthusiast. I thought the forest and all the wild places, well, they were wonderful, and I thought they were safer than being around a city full of humans, even though I felt safe in the city. That was just one of many contradictory beliefs I had, but we're not going to go into those. I was living in Tacoma, Washington at the time, which put me in a great place to explore a lot of wilderness and forests. I was hiking that day the Box Canyon Trail near Mount Rainier. My route was to hike Box Canyon, then follow the road down to the forest road that went up to Summit Creek Falls. Then I would backtrack to a campground about halfway, and from there make the return trip down into Box Canyon Trail again, and from there go home the next day. Now, the day that I set out, it was very nice, sunny, and breezy. The afternoon brought more heavy breeze, I guess you'd call them winds, and they were having a strange effect in the trees. You hear the treetops move and rustle. You hear the creaking and popping of the trees. It's a little like being out on a wood boat on a rough sea. You hear a lot of noise, and it soon becomes background. I was on my return from the falls, heading down to 123, when I was hit with an awful smell on the wind. It just kept coming around me. Then it would go away with the swirling wind. I thought, there must be a long-dead animal somewhere nearby, something old enough that it didn't smell like fresh rotting flesh, but something musty and earthy, something decaying. Now that's how I reasoned out what it was I was smelling. It didn't smell like a live animal, and it didn't smell like a dead one either, but it smelled organic and earthy, but yet not like plant or dirt. I'm sorry, I can't find the right description for this smell. Well, that smell swirled around, and then it would suddenly be gone. That happened several times as I was walking. I was puzzled that even though I'd moved quite a way from where I first smelled that, it was still following me and hitting me at times. There was a downed tree very close to the road in one spot. I thought it would be a good time for a small break. I sat down there at the log. I drank some water, and I ate an apple. While sitting there enjoying the breeze, that smell came and hit me again out of nowhere. But this time it was so strong I almost threw up the apple I had just eaten. I looked around puzzled. wondering what this could be. I did have a small thought that maybe it was a sick bear or some other animal with an infection or something that was in a bad way but still alive. I looked around, and there was nothing ahead of me, and there was nothing to the left or to the right. Now, this whole time, I'm hearing the trees creak and pop. I'm hearing leaves rustling from all the wind. Now, that's why I think I never heard it. Now, the smell was just impossible by this time. I decided it was time to get away from that awful smell. It was getting hard to breathe. I stood up from the log, bent and turned slightly to grab my pack to put it on my back. And that's when I saw where the smell was coming from. It had been standing behind me, still as a statue. I think it must have been following me from inside the trees for probably half the trip down from the falls. It was at least 7 feet tall. It was wide-chested, with broad shoulders. It was wider and taller than my French door refrigerator at home. Looked like it weighed more, too. If I'm put to guessing, I'll put its weight in the 500 to 600-pound range. This was a wall, a mass of muscle. It was standing about 20 feet behind where I'd been sitting on the log. Now, my ranch house at home is 30 feet wide and 50 feet long, and that Sasquatch was closer than the width of my house. I could see its face, so it might have even been closer. I'm not good at guessing distances, and honestly, I wasn't calculating space or distance when I saw it. I was just processing how gosh darn close it was to me. That's all. But its face. It's exactly as others describe it. Head sitting right down on the shoulders, no neck. A sloped top with a domed head. Dark eyes set deep and a little bit far apart. With wide, thin lips and massive jaws, covered in hair everywhere. But the thing that struck me were the eyes. I once dated a man from Lafayette, Louisiana, while in college. I stayed there the part of a summer with him and his family. They were great people, and he had some other family members that loved the swamps. They knew how to hunt and fish and do all kinds of things. They took us out one time into the Atchafalaya swamp, and we went down the Atchafalaya River. First time I ever saw an alligator in the wild. It came right up to our boat, unafraid. I looked at it from the side of the boat, and that dead-eye reptilian stare is something I've never forgotten. It was cold, calculating, and full of impersonal, what I call murdery thoughts. That's a phrase that I like to use for this. Now, I'm not saying that Bigfoot had the eyes of a reptile. Not at all. But it had the same expression on its face. It was cold, impersonal, very cold and calculating. Otherwise, the face seemed to be without expression. I stayed half bent with my hand on my pack. I was afraid to move. Right there before me was the fabled and legendary creature of the forest, a Sasquatch. I had no doubt, but I also had no knowledge of it. Do I run? Could it be friendly? No, from the look of it, I decided I didn't think it was friendly. I decided staying bent really wasn't to my advantage, so I straightened up very slowly. The whole time, it kept its eyes right on me, staring holes. I could see its chest expanding and getting smaller as it breathed. I saw its eyes blink. The only place I don't think it had fur on its face were the lips and the eye area. The fur was a dark brown color, with an undercoat that I could see where the fur parted naturally. The undercoat looked darker, almost black. It was the same color as the skin around the eyes, and a darker shade of the lip color. As I straightened up, I saw its eyes change. It watched me with interest. My heart was beating so loud right then, it was almost all I could hear in my ears. There were a lot of thoughts going through my head, while at the same time I felt like I was sort of blanked out. But I remember thinking that maybe it had followed me. Maybe it had smelled my apple. I had another apple in my pack. I hadn't as yet put my pack on, so I snaked my hand in, felt around, and grabbed the apple. I lightly tossed the apple near it. It rolled near its feet, but maybe a foot or two from it. If it took notice of that apple, well, I didn't see it. It stood there and remained motionless, its eyes never looking at the apple. I know at that point I was beginning to talk to it. Don't ask me why, and don't ask me what I was saying. I was talking to it, trying to keep it calm, or maybe trying to keep me calm. And the whole time I was backing up towards the old forest road. The road was just a few feet away. I know being out in the open wouldn't really help me, but I did not want to stay in the forest trees with it. I kept backing up until I was firmly on the road. I had been so focused on the Sasquatch in front of me that when I stepped out on the road, I almost stepped right out in front of a car coming down the road. I can't believe I hadn't heard it. I heard its horn beep, and it swerved right around me, never slowing down. I remember I quickly looked at the car, and then I looked right back to where the Sasquatch was. Well, it was still there, but not right where it had been. It had come forward a few feet. I think only the sound of the car stopped it. That car went by so fast, I couldn't even have time to flag them down. But then again, how many people would really stop for a woman out there on a road waving them down on some back forest area? Sounds like the start of a scary movie, doesn't it? Well, for me, I guess I kind of was in my own scary movie. Instinct told me not to run, but I also was afraid to turn my back to it to just walk away. It didn't look any friendlier than it had at the beginning of this whole thing. I started walking sideways while keeping an eye on it in the trees. I was kind of ecstatic at first because it didn't move as I moved away from it. It stayed right there, but it turned to watch me as I went. Then all my joy faded when it began walking right toward me, but yet stayed off the road. It was walking parallel to me, and it was turned watching me. When the sun would come through the treetops to hit its face, it seemed that it looked angrier, and it was walking with a real determination. It was not a casual walk, if you understand my meaning. So there I was, a lone woman, young, and thinking, here I was so smart. I was so prepared. I even had some pepper spray on my pack. I had told myself that I didn't need anything stronger. Who in the world would want to harm me? And yet there I found myself, being followed by the most frightening thing that I had ever encountered in the forest, and for that matter, anywhere else. The most I'd encountered before that were a couple of bears, and they immediately went the other way when I made noise at them. So yeah, I was overconfident, to say the least. I was seriously beginning to have trouble controlling my panic, my breathing, even my urge to run. I was still a long way from normal human traffic areas. I was alone and vulnerable. Now my heart really hit the ground when I saw the Sasquatch as it walked grab a hold of a tree and navigated to the side of it closer to the road. It did a double step, getting closer to me. I was now about 10 feet from this creature at my best guess, and its face up close was even more terrifying. Now, I said that its expression was expressionless, like that alligator's, but I really wasn't so sure right then. The closer it got, the more light on its face, and the more I was convinced there was an expression, one of hate, malice, or some similar emotion. But it was also a cold hate, a cold malice, or something else similar. But it was frighteningly cold, impersonal, and that felt more dangerous. I knew there would be no pleading, no reasoning at all if it meant to kill me, and I was beginning to think that might be the goal. I was literally terrified for my life. Why was it following me? I remember actually thinking, this is how I'm going to die. I mean, would anyone find me? I thought about that. Would my family ever know what happened to me? Or would I just become another missing person, no trace left behind? I then heard another vehicle coming down the road, and I decided no matter what, I would throw myself in front of them, jump on the hood if I had to, literally throw myself in the road. I decided I'd rather be run over and killed than, well, whatever the Sasquatch had planned. And the Sasquatch also heard that car coming. I saw it quickly step back into the trees, maybe another 5 or 10 feet, just enough to be in some deeper shadows, but it was still visible. I stood in the middle of the road, waving my arms frantically, and I was relieved to see it begin to slow down. I didn't give them a chance to come to a full stop. I ran right up to the car, which I hadn't even realized was a ranger vehicle. I had hit the lottery, and I was so terrified I didn't know it. It was a ranger from the park ranger station at Ohana-Pekosh, which is where my scheduled campground site was located. Now, he probably thought I was a mad woman. I was almost screaming the word Sasquatch over and over as I yanked again and again on the door handle. I wanted in that vehicle. I wanted to be safe. He finally unlocked the door and let me in. I kept telling him to please go, let's go. But oh no. He cut me off and told me to calm down. I was so shocked that I went quiet, but I could hear my hard breathing. He looked at me and he said one word, "Where?" I pointed past him over to his window where I could still see the Sasquatch in the trees. It was very visible. It didn't look a thing like any of the other trees. He looked over to where I was pointing. He looked for long seconds. I was starting to get frantic. Why weren't we moving? That Sasquatch was still there, within sight. I didn't understand this man. I mean, who stays there and looks at a Sasquatch with no reaction? Well, apparently park rangers and other service people in that area, that's who. I heard him take a deep breath, and then we slowly started moving down the road. I said, "You saw it, right? It was right there." I had to say it several times because he didn't even want to answer. He hadn't said a word. Then he waited a second after my last tirade, and he said, no, he hadn't seen anything at all over there. I am sure my mouth was hanging open for several seconds. I know he saw it. He had to. I said so to him. He still didn't say anything. I kept saying, "You had to see it. How could you not?" He cut me off again and started to ask me basic info like my name and where I was going and where I had come from. I answered him everything he asked. Then I asked if he could take me to my campground area, and from there I'd arrange some kind of transportation back to my car over near Box Canyon Trailhead. I had had enough hiking for that day. When I told him my campsite, He looked at me and he said, "Well, that'll work just fine." He happened to be from the ranger station right there. I didn't realize there was a ranger station right there, but there is. All the way, I kept looking at him in absolute disbelief. I know he saw that Sasquatch. When he looked that way and then he looked back at me, well, his face was suddenly blank, and it hadn't been before. Before it was full of worry and concern and focused on me, trying to understand. But when he turned back, his face was perfectly blank. He was being very careful and controlled when he turned back to me, and after that, he was very controlled and careful in what he said. And he was even worse once we got to the ranger station/campground. He was very patronizing. It was like he was dealing with a child who had awakened him screaming about some bad dream. I couldn't wait to get away from there, but in the end I had to wait over 3 hours before my sister got there. I was fuming. My fear of the day's earlier events had now begun to turn to anger, and I was simmering. I simmered silently. I hardly spoke a word those 3 hours, because that's when I knew. I knew it was futile to say anything, to ask questions, because he knew. They knew. They know Sasquatches are out there. Oh, you know they know. They know the truth, and they hide it from everyone. Maybe they're told to. Maybe they individually deny it because they get harassed from coworkers or superiors, or I don't know. But I do know that they know. So how do we make them confess? How do we make them acknowledge we are not crazy? And that's how I felt that day. I heard him telling the other guy there the whole thing. They were on the verge of snickering. And I also felt there was some kind of collusion between them. They gave me a standard answer every time. So that's my story. It's how I know we're being lied to. And believe me, we are being lied to. I think they don't acknowledge it because Sasquatches may be very rare. That's what I think. I think they want to protect the population of Sasquatches that exists. And it's better to let us roam around and only every once in a while ever encounter them. And as long as they discount us, well, it didn't happen, did it? They don't exist. But can you imagine if they did admit that Sasquatches were real? Take a moment and think about that. Can you imagine how filled the forest would be with every hunter and opportunist out there hunting for a Sasquatch trophy? Wouldn't that look great over the fireplace? Can you imagine them trying to get the bragging right of being the first to deliver a Sasquatch to science and to the media? Yeah, you know they'd be out there by the thousands. Well, when my sister picked me up, I told her everything, and she listened. I was telling her everything about it, and she suddenly brought up that it's illegal to kill a Bigfoot in Skamania County. And Skamania County, interestingly enough, is only about 50 miles south from where all of that happened to me. I think 50 miles is nothing to a Sasquatch. But her theory is that if Skamania County made that law, it must mean that they know Bigfoot is real and he's out there. But I'm not so sure about that. I mean, after looking into why they made that law, I think it's more about the scenario that I first stated, that there would be a high probability of people accidentally getting shot by over-wild hunters, thinking someone else in a black hiking suit is Bigfoot. It's interesting to note that Skamania County has Mount St. Helens in it and part of Mount Adams. Those are two well-known Bigfoot hotspots. It also has the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. Now that's a Bigfoot area too. And it's an area well known for many, many missing people. Now, I'm not saying they're connected, but it is something to contemplate. Well, thank you for letting me rant. And thank you for letting me get this story out. You know, there's nothing worse than feeling like no one is listening to you, patronizing you. And that's how I felt with this story every time I've tried to tell it to anyone. I believe that Sasquatch was following me for some reason. I don't want to speculate why. But thankfully, I'm here today to tell you about it. So, do what you want with this. You can believe me or not. But I know for a fact, there's a lot of people out there who know that they should believe me, and they do, but they'll never admit it. And those people work for the Park Service. Thank you. Signed, Valerie C. from Tacoma, Washington. Well, thank you, Valerie. That just sounds like a very frightening encounter. I think it's incredible that it was a park ranger who came upon you. You should definitely be thanking your lucky stars on that one. I wonder if he would ever admit it. I wonder if he ever reported it. Don't know how you check in that. All right, well, now listen, everyone. I think that's all I've got for you tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. But you know we'll be getting together again in just a few more days. But until then, please, always remember, absence of proof is not proof of absence. Thanks for listening.